This is it for Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Closing arguments in the penalty part of his trial wrap up today, and then it's up to the jury to make a choice: life in prison or the death penalty. I'm Ty Hernandez in New York. Hello, everyone. 3 people were killed near the marathon's finish line on April 15th, 2013. More than 260 were injured. Let's go to ABC's Tom Yamas, who just left the courtroom. Tom, we're in the midst of closing arguments. What happened today?
That's right. The prosecution just wrapped up their closing arguments. And really what they wanted to do is they wanted to focus on 3 different images so the jurors would never forget. The first image being of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev before he plants his bomb at the Boston Marathon. They said he walked up and just 4 feet away from him were a row of children. And he stayed there for minutes, leaving his bomb there and then walking off. That was one image they wanted him to remember. Then they also talked about him in the boat, how he wrote that so-called terrorist manifesto, how there were no regrets there, no remorse. They were the words of a terrorist. And they also talked about how bombing those people, killing those 2 people, his bomb killed 2 people, including little Martin Richard. He went to Whole Foods 20 minutes later and he bought a half gallon of milk. They showed that video, and of course the infamous video that they brought out as a trump card during this sentencing phase, which of course was the video of him in the holding cell 3 months after the bombings, shuffling around, fixing his hair, and then giving the bird to a surveillance camera inside that holding cell. They said that shows someone who was not remorseful at all, somebody who didn't care what he was doing, someone who was trying to make a political statement by bombing the Boston Marathon. He knew he would get TV coverage. He knew there would be multiple victims. He knew that some of the victims would be children. And they concluded by saying his actions have earned him a sentence of death. Ty.
At the same time, and of course the jury is not allowed to see this, the Boston Globe ran an op-ed this morning written by the parents of Martin Richard, the 8-year-old boy who was killed. They don't want the death penalty.
Yeah, they had penned that op-ed before speaking about that they were against the death penalty. And their reasoning for the family makes sense to some of the victims, because some of the victims have told us the same kind of theories about this, that if he gets the death penalty, he'll be able to appeal and appeal and appeal, and at some point he will never leave their lives. And so they're afraid that if he doesn't get life in prison, if he does get the death penalty, that the media will always be following him and they'll always have to hear his name. Whereas if he's sentenced to life in prison, he will go away to that Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, and he will essentially rot in a cell 23 hours a day, locked inside of that cell. But other victims we've spoken to, like Liz Norton, her sons each lost a leg. She wants a death penalty. He says he deserves to die. So the victims are somewhat split about what verdict they essentially want the jurors to find.
Now, we know the defense is coming up next with closing arguments, but before all of this happened today, the judge gave the jury some instruction. What did he tell them?
Basically, he was trying to explain to them what their role is, and it is really complicated because they're going to be looking at all 30 counts from the indictment, because even though, you know, we're all focused on the death penalty here, they're going to be looking at all 30 counts, some that hold the life sentence as well. And then they have to weigh 2 things: the aggravating factors versus the mitigating factors. Now, to break that down, the aggravating factors are things that the prosecution say are things that cannot be disputed, that he indeed was a terrorist, that he indeed was over 18 years old, that he planned and executed this bombing mission. And then the mitigating factors are what the defense is arguing, basically that he only did this because he was under the spell of his older brother. He only did this because he had no father figure, because his father was mentally ill and had moved back to Russia. He only did this because his mom was radicalized, a radicalist Islamist who then radicalized Tamerlan, who became a jihadist. So all of these mitigating factors are the reasons why he had a role in the bombing. But without Tamerlan Tsarnaev, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev never ambles onto Boylston Street and plants those bombs. If the jurors buy that argument, if they believe those mitigating factors are the reason why he became a terrorist, why he was one of the Boston Marathon bombers, then they will choose life in prison over a death penalty.
All right, and of course we expect to hear some of those arguments in terms of mitigating factors coming up later this afternoon. Tom, I want to thank you so much for joining us outside the courtroom. ABC's Tom Yamas, and you can keep up with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring this story for exclusive updates on the go. I'm Ty Hernandez in New York.